The Duke of Sternford had been kneeling for 11 minutes when the first of the neighbors noticed. It was Mrs. Frayne who saw him first from the upstairs window of number 14, where she had gone to close the shutters against the rain. She stood with one hand on the latch and watched a man in a dark riding coat lower himself to his knees on the wet stone steps of the Ellsworth house, and she did not close the shutters at all. She called for her daughter. Her daughter called for the maid. Within a quarter of an hour, every window on the south side of Brock Street had at least one face pressed to the glass, and the Duke of Sternford knelt on in the rain as though there were no windows in Bath at all. Inside the house, Mrs. Oulton heard the commotion from the kitchen passage and came through to the front hall with a tallow candle in one hand and a crease between her brows that had not been there at breakfast. She looked through the narrow pane beside the door and saw him. She set the candle down on the hall table very carefully and went upstairs. Delphine was in the morning room. She was sitting at the escritoire with a letter half finished in front of her, a letter to no one in particular, an exercise in keeping her hand steady. And when Mrs. Oulton appeared in the doorway, she did not look up. She knew. She had heard the knocker 10 minutes ago, a single strike, and then silence. She had heard the sound of something settling on the steps outside, the particular muffled compression of weight on wet stone, and she had known, in the way one knows a storm is coming before the sky has fully darkened, what it meant. "Miss Ellsworth," Mrs. Oulton said. "Yes." "The Duke of Sternford is outside." "Yes." "He is. He's kneeling, miss." Delphine set down her pen. She aligned it with the edge of the blotter, a precise quarter-inch from the ruled line. "Thank you, Mrs. Oulton," she said. "That will be all." Mrs. Oulton hesitated. In 17 years of service to Sir Martin Ellsworth and his daughters, she had never once been uncertain whether an instruction had been fully given. She was uncertain now. The young woman at the desk had not raised her eyes, had not altered her posture, had not drawn breath any differently than she'd been drawing it before the most prominent unmarried duke in England lowered himself into the mud on her doorstep. Mrs. Oulton turned and went back down the stairs, and when she reached the hall, she touched the edge of the door with her fingertips, as though checking that it was still closed. It was still closed. The courtship, if it could properly be called that, if the word did not imply a mutuality that had been present on only one side, had begun 6 weeks earlier, at a dinner given by the Countess of Brading in her rooms on the Royal Crescent. Delphine had been seated beside a retired admiral who spoke only of frigates, and across from a woman whose name she did not catch, who spoke only of her nerves, and she had endured both with the particular composure that came naturally to the elder daughter of a baronet who had raised her without a mother and with very little money, and with the unspoken understanding that composure was the one currency they could always afford. Raphael Dacre had arrived late. He had come from London, from the House of Lords, where he had sat through 3 readings of a bill concerning harbour fees that had interested him not at all, and he carried the weariness of it in the set of his shoulders. He was tall and dark-haired and moved through the room the way certain men move through rooms, as though the furniture had been arranged around the expectation of his arrival. Delphine had watched him from behind the rim of her wineglass and thought nothing of him except that he walked as though he had never been refused anything, and that this was not, in her experience, a quality that improved upon acquaintance. He had spoken to her after the meal, in the withdrawing room, when she was standing near the window because the fire was too hot and the conversation too close. He had asked her about the book she was holding. She had brought it with her, a small octavo volume of Cowper's letters, because she had learned long ago that a book in hand was a more effective defense than any chaperone, and she had answered him plainly, without the practiced brightness that other women applied to conversations with dukes, and something in his expression had shifted, not softened, shifted, as though a door he had expected to be locked had opened to a room he had not known was there. He called the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. He brought her flowers, winter jasmine, which was not fashionable, and he sat in her father's parlor and spoke to Sir Martin about harbour fees with a sincerity that even Delphine, who was skilled at identifying insincerity, could not fault. He walked with her in the gardens at Sydney Place. He accompanied her to the pump room and stood beside her while she drank the waters and made no comment about the taste, which she found unexpectedly considerate. He lent her books, serious ones, not the novels that men typically pressed upon women they wished to impress, but histories and political essays, as though he believed she might have thoughts about them. She did have thoughts about them. She told him so. He listened. Sir Martin watched all of this with the particular wariness of a father who has very little to offer a duke, and who knows that the distance between a baronet's daughter and a duchess is not measured in miles but in assumptions. He said nothing to Delphine. He did not need to. She understood the arithmetic as well as he did, better perhaps because she had been performing it since she was old enough to understand that their house was smaller than other houses, that their carriage was older, that her dresses were turned and retrimmed where other women's dresses were simply replaced. But Raphael Dacre, Duke of Sternford, continued to call. And Delphine, against every calculation she had made, against every careful wall she had built between herself and the expectation of disappointment, began to believe him. That was the cruelty of it in the end. Not that he had said what he said, but that she had believed him first. The dinner at Lord Cathcart's was held on a Thursday evening in late November in a house on Great Pulteney Street with too many candles and not enough ventilation. Delphine had not been invited. The Cathcarts did not include baronets' daughters in their supper lists. But Raphael had gone because Lord Cathcart sat on a committee that interested him, and because he had not yet learned that there are rooms in which a man is most himself when the woman he is courting is not present to see it. Lady Whitmore had been there. She was a friend of Delphine's late mother, or had called herself one, and she possessed the particular talent of certain women for delivering information that would cause pain while maintaining the appearance of rendering a service. She came to Brock Street the following morning. She sat in the parlor. She drank tea from the second-best china. And she told Delphine, with an expression of such careful sympathy that it was indistinguishable from satisfaction, what the Duke of Sternford had said when Lord Cathcart had remarked upon his frequent visits to a certain house on Brock Street. Lord Cathcart had been direct. "They say you mean to offer for the Ellsworth girl, Sternford, a baronet's daughter. That is rather beneath your weight, is it not?" And Raphael, who had lent her Gibbon and listened to her opinions on harbor reform, who had sat in her father's parlor and spoken to Sir Martin with what she had taken for respect, who had touched her hand once, at the turning of a garden path, and looked at her as though she were the first real thing he had seen in months. Raphael had laughed. He had laughed, and he had said, "One does not marry for conversation, Cathcart." 7 words. Lady Whitmore delivered them with the precision of a surgeon and the relish of a gossip, and Delphine heard them with her hands folded in her lap and her face as still as a painting. She thanked Lady Whitmore for calling. She showed her to the door. She went upstairs to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the Cowper letters on her nightstand, the volume he had returned to her with a passage marked in pencil, a passage about the insufficiency of words to carry what the heart means. And she understood with a clarity that was like cold water that she had been an entertainment, not a cruelty, not a seduction, an entertainment, something pleasant to occupy the hours between the House of Lords and dinner. One does not marry for conversation. One converses while waiting for the marriage that actually matters, the strategic one, the one that does not require explaining to Lord Cathcart. She packed 2 trunks that evening. She left no note. By morning, she and Rosalind were in the coach to her father's house. They had been staying with their aunt in Laura Place for the season's end, and the rooms on Laura Place were empty, and the winter jasmine he had sent 3 days ago was still in its vase on the hall table, already beginning to brown at the edges. Raphael had called at Laura Place the following afternoon and found it shut. He had sent a letter. It was returned unopened. He had sent another. It was returned. He had sent a third, marked urgent, and it came back with the seal unbroken and a single line from Sir Martin Ellsworth on the reverse. "My daughter does not wish to receive your correspondence, Your Grace. I trust you will respect this." He had respected it for 9 days. 9 days during which, according to his steward Grieve, who had served 3 dukes and seen all manner of behavior from each, the duke did not eat a full meal, did not attend his correspondence, did not go to the House of Lords for the division on the harbor bill he had spent 6 weeks following, and did not sleep in the same room for 2 consecutive nights, moving between the bedchamber, the library, and the study, as though searching for a position in which the knowledge of what he had done might hurt less. On the 10th day, he rode to Bath. Rosalind Ellsworth was 19. She was fair where Delphine was dark, quick where Delphine was measured, and she possessed a directness that Delphine recognized as simply her nature. She came into the morning room 14 minutes after Mrs. Oulton had left it and stood in the doorway with her arms folded. "He is still there," Rosalind said. "I know. Delphine, he is kneeling, on the steps, in the rain. Mrs. Frayn's maid has come to our kitchen door to ask if we require assistance, which is her way of asking what in heaven's name is happening. I know what is happening." "Do you intend to leave him there?" Delphine looked at her sister. There was a stillness in her face that Rosalind knew well, the composure their mother had apparently possessed and that Delphine had inherited or invented. It was the face she wore when she was performing the most demanding calculations of her inner life. "Yes," Delphine said, "for now." Rosalind opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "He will catch his death. He is wearing a riding coat. He will be cold and wet and uncomfortable, and he will not catch his death, because men who catch their death do not ride through November rain to kneel on doorsteps. He came here to be seen doing this. I intend to let him be seen doing it for long enough that it costs him something." Rosalind stared at her. "Costs him something? Delphine, he is a duke. He is kneeling in the street. It has already cost him something." "Not enough," Delphine said, and picked up her pen. Sir Martin Ellsworth was in his study on the first floor, which had a window that looked down onto Brock Street at an angle that afforded a view of his own front steps without the indignity of pressing one's face to the glass. He stood 3 feet back from the window, behind the curtain, and watched the Duke of Sternford kneel in the rain with the expression of a man who is seeing something he does not fully understand but recognizes as important. Sir Martin was not a complicated man. He had been a good husband, was a good father, and had managed a modest estate with the understanding that there would be no second chance if the first one failed. He had watched the Duke court his eldest daughter with a hope he did not permit himself to express, and when Delphine had returned from Laura Place, white-faced and dry-eyed, and told him what had been said at Lord Cathcart's dinner, he had felt that hope collapse into a tired certainty, that the world arranged itself as it always had, with men like the Duke on one side and families like the Ellsworths on the other, and that the distance between them was not bridged by winter jasmine or marked passages in books of letters. But now the Duke was on his knees, on Sir Martin's steps, in Sir Martin's reign. And Sir Martin, who had spent his whole life understanding his place in the order of things, watched a man who occupied the very pinnacle of that order kneel at its base, and he thought, well, that is not nothing. 23 minutes. The rain had thickened to a steady, deliberate downpour that darkened the stone of Brock Street and turned the gutters into shallow rivers. Raphael's riding coat, a dark blue wool, the coat of a man who could afford to ruin good cloth, was soaked through. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His knees were in a shallow pool of water that had collected between the second and third steps, and his hands were at his sides, palms open, in a posture that was not prayer, but was not far from it. He had not knocked again after the first time. He had not called out. He had not tried the servant's entrance or sent a card. He had knelt, and he had stayed, and his silence was as deliberate as his posture, the silence of a man who understood that he had used words badly once and did not trust himself to use them well now, and who had chosen the only language that remained to him, which was his body and his discomfort and his willingness to remain in both. Mrs. Oulton came upstairs again at 29 minutes. She stood in the doorway of the morning room and said nothing, which was itself a communication, and Delphine looked up from the letter she had not written a single additional word of and said, "Is my father watching?" "He is in his study, miss." "And Rosalind?" "At the landing window." "And the street?" Mrs. Oulton hesitated. "Mrs. Frayn has come out onto her steps with an umbrella, miss. I believe she intends to offer it to him." Something crossed Delphine's face, not amusement, not quite, but something adjacent to it, something that recognized the absurdity of the scene without diminishing its weight. "She will not reach him," Delphine said. "He will refuse it." "How can you be sure, miss?" "Because an umbrella would make him comfortable, and he did not come here to be comfortable." Mrs. Oulton looked at her for a long moment, and in that look was everything the housekeeper understood about Delphine Ellsworth, that she was not cruel, that she was not cold, that the composure she wore like armor was not the absence of feeling, but the discipline of it. and that whatever was happening on the steps outside was something Delphine was managing with the same meticulous care she applied to the household accounts and the turning of her dresses and the maintenance of a life that had never once had the luxury of carelessness. "Will you want tea, miss?" Mrs. Olton asked. "Yes, please," Delphine said, "in 10 minutes." Mrs. Olton went down. She did not make tea. She understood, in the way that women who run households understand things, that the tea had been a kindness, something for her worry to hold besides itself. 37 minutes. Mrs. Frayne had offered the umbrella. He had refused it. She had retreated to her steps and remained there, joined by her daughter and by the manservant from number 18, and by a woman who had simply stopped walking in the rain to watch. Brock Street was acquiring spectators. Sir Martin came down from his study. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the front door for a long moment, and then he walked to the morning room and stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter, and what he said was, "Delphine," just her name. But he said it the way he had said it when her mother died, when she was 11 years old and dry-eyed even then, even at 11, standing beside a bed that still smelled of lavender and fever. And hearing it now, spoken in the same tone, in the same register of helpless tenderness, Delphine set down her pen for the second time and met her father's eyes. "He said I was not worth marrying," she said, not to explain, to hear it aloud, to test whether it still weighed what it had weighed 9 days ago. "I know what he said. He laughed, Papa, when they asked him. He laughed as though the idea were absurd." "I know. And now he is on his knees on our steps and the street is watching, and he is spending every piece of dignity he has on a woman he told Lord Cathcart he would not marry for conversation." She paused. Her voice had not broken. Her voice never broke. But there was something behind it, something held very carefully, like water in cupped hands. "What am I supposed to do with that?" Sir Martin crossed the room. He sat in the chair beside the escritoire, the chair her mother had sat in years ago when this had been a different room and a different life, and he took his daughter's hand. His fingers were warm and dry and rougher than a baronet's fingers ought to be, because he had never been able to afford the luxury of softness. "You are supposed to decide what it means to you," he said. "Not what it means to him. He knows what it means to him. That is why he is out there. The question is what it means to you, and only you can answer that, and you should take exactly as long as you need." Delphine looked at her father. She looked at him the way she had looked at him at 11 beside her mother's bed, with the absolute trust of a person who has only one fixed point and knows it, and then she nodded, and Sir Martin released her hand and left the room, and she sat in the gray light of the November morning and listened to the rain and let the questions settle inside her like a stone dropped into still water. 41 minutes. 44. 47. At 49 minutes, Rosalind came in. She did not ask permission. She sat on the window seat across from the escritoire and pulled her knees up to her chest and said, "His lips are turning color." "Rosalind, I'm not telling you to open the door. I am telling you that I can see him from the landing, and his lips are turning color. And Mrs. Frayne has sent her maid for a physician, and the entire street is watching a duke die on our steps, and I do not know what the correct response to that is, but I think you do, and I think it is time." Delphine was quiet for a long moment. The rain on the windows filled the silence between them, not a silence of distance but of proximity, the silence of two sisters who had shared a room until 3 years ago, and who still, sometimes, in moments of crisis, breathed in the same rhythm without knowing it. "What if it is not enough?" Delphine said. She said it so quietly that Rosalind almost did not hear it. What if what is not enough? This, the kneeling, the rain. What if it is a performance? What if he goes back to London and sits at another dinner and they ask him about the mad morning he spent on a doorstep in Bath and he laughs again? What if the laughter is who he is and this is the aberration? Rosalind looked at her sister. She looked at the face she had known her whole life, the composed face, the careful face, the face that had learned not to want things too openly because wanting was expensive and they had never had the currency for it. And she said the truest thing she knew. "Then you will survive it. You have survived everything. But Delphine, what if it is not a performance? What if you leave him out there until the question is no longer answerable because he has gone home or simply understood that the door will never open? You will survive that too, but you will wonder. And you are not a woman who does well with wondering. Delphine closed her eyes. She pressed her fingertips to the edge of the desk, the smooth, worn walnut edge that had been polished by her mother's hands and then by her own, and she felt the house around her, the house that had held her through every loss and every calculation, the house that had taught her that dignity was the only thing that could not be taken away. And she thought about a man in the rain who was giving his away on purpose, and she understood at last what he was saying. Not "I am sorry," not "forgive me." He was saying, "I will be worth less for your sake. I will kneel at your level and lower, and the world will see me do it, and I will not care, because the world's opinion of me is the thing I spent instead of defending you, and I am here to show you that I have learned which one I should have spent." She stood. She crossed the morning room. She walked down the stairs, past Mrs. Ulton, who pressed herself against the wall to let her pass, past the hall table where a candle guttered in the draught from under the door. She put her hand on the latch. She opened the door. The cold hit her first, then the rain, fine, driving, relentless, then the smell of wet stone and wet wool, and the particular metallic sweetness of November rain in a city built of limestone. And then she saw him. He was exactly as Mrs. Ulton had described, kneeling, soaked, his riding coat darkened to near black, his hair flattened against his skull, his hands at his sides, palms open, fingers slightly curled. His face was white. Rosalind had been right about his lips. They were faintly blue, the blue of cold that has gone past discomfort into something more honest. His eyes were open. He was looking at the door. He had been looking at the door, she understood, the entire time, not at the street, not at Mrs. Frayne, not at the rain, at the door, as though it were the only thing in Bath. She stood in the doorway and looked at him. She did not step out into the rain. She did not extend her hand. She stood on the threshold in her gray wool day dress with the mended cuff that she had restitched herself last week, and she looked down at the Duke of Sternford, and the silence between them was so complete that Mrs. Frayne, across the street, stopped breathing. Then Delphine spoke. "Why did you laugh?" 3 words, not an accusation, not a demand, a question. The question, the only one that mattered. Not did you mean it, because meaning was complicated and men were skilled at reframing their meanings after the fact. Not are you sorry, because sorry was easy and cost nothing. But why did you laugh? Why in that specific moment, at that specific table, when a man asked you whether you intended to marry her? Why was your first instinct to make her smaller? Raphael looked up at her. The rain ran down his face and into his collar, and he did not wipe it away. He had been kneeling for 53 minutes, and his body was a single, continuous ache from his knees to his jaw, and none of it mattered, because she was standing in the door, and she was looking at him, and he owed her the truth, and the truth was worse than the cold. "Because I was afraid," he said. His voice was rough, stripped, not the voice of a duke, not the measured, resonant instrument he used in the House of Lords and at dinner tables and in every room he had ever entered with the assumption that it would rearrange itself around him. This was the voice underneath that voice, the one that had no title and no precedence and no coat of arms. I was afraid of what it would mean if I said yes, if I told Cathcart that I intended to offer for you, because then it would be real, and if it was real, then I would be a man who had chosen, not arranged, not negotiated, not fulfilled an obligation, but chosen. And the choosing frightened me more than I understood, and so I laughed, because laughter was the easiest way to make the distance between wanting you and deserving you seem like it did not exist. He paused. The rain filled the pause. "I do not deserve you," he said. "I know that. I knew it when I laughed, and I knew it when you left, and I have known it every hour since, but I am not here to argue that I deserve you. I am here to show you that I will do the thing I failed to do at Cathcart's table. I will be seen. I will be seen wanting you, and I will be seen diminished by it, and I will not laugh, and I will not look away. And if you close this door, I will still be here when you open it again, because the only thing I have left to offer you is the willingness to remain." Delphine looked at him. She looked at the rain on his face, and the mud on his knees and the open palms, and she felt the stone she had been carrying. The stone of 7 words spoken at a dinner table. Shift inside her. Not dissolve. Shift. Resettle. Find a new position that allowed for the possibility that a man could mean what he said in the rain, even if he had not meant what he said at dinner, and that the measure of a person was not the worst thing they had done, but whether they understood why it was the worst thing, and whether they were willing to kneel in the knowledge of it. "Stand up," she said. He stood. It took him a moment. His knees had stiffened in the cold, and the movement was graceless, unsteady. The Duke of Sternford stumbling on the steps of a baronet's house on Brock Street in full view of 6 households and a woman with an umbrella. And Delphine watched him do it without helping, because she needed to see him struggle, needed to see the absence of ease in a man who had never been without it. He stood before her, close enough that she could see the water beaded on his eyelashes, and the faint tremor in his jaw, and the way his hands, at his sides, were shaking, not from the cold or not only from the cold. "You will court me properly," she said. "You will call at this house and sit in my father's parlor and speak to him with the respect he is owed, not because he is useful to you, but because he is my father, and that makes him worthy of it. You will not send flowers. You will come yourself. You will be seen coming. You will not explain to anyone why, and if they ask, you will not laugh. You will say her name and you will mean it. Yes," he said, "and if you ever speak of me as though I am less than what I am, if you ever reduce me to a jest at a table, if you ever flinch from the fact of choosing me, I will not wait for Lady Whitmore to tell me. I will know, and I will close this door again, and it will stay closed." Yes, she looked at him. The rain was falling on her now too, on the threshold, darkening the shoulders of her gray dress, and she did not step back. "Come inside," she said. "Mrs. Olton will find you dry clothes. You will have tea with my father. You will not propose today." "When?" "When I tell you that you may." She stepped aside. He crossed the threshold. The door closed behind him, and Brock Street exhaled, and Mrs. Frayne put down her umbrella and told her daughter that she had just witnessed something that would keep every drawing room in Bath talking until Christmas, and she was not wrong. He courted her properly. He called at Brock Street every day for 3 weeks, arriving on foot in the rain or the cold or the thin winter sunlight, and he sat in Sir Martin's parlor and discussed harbor reform and the maintenance of limestone and the rising cost of candles. And he spoke to Sir Martin not as a duke speaks to a baronet, but as a man speaks to a man whose good opinion he requires and has not yet earned. Sir Martin gave it slowly. He gave it the way he gave everything, carefully, with the understanding that it could not be replaced once spent, and Raphael received it with the gravity of someone who understood what it cost. He walked with Delphine in the small garden behind the house, a 1/4 acre with a gravel path and a sundial that had been her mother's, and he listened to her speak about Cowper, about estate management, about the way light fell through limestone in the late afternoon. When she asked him about the House of Lords, he answered her fully, as though her interest were the most natural thing in the world, and she understood that he was not performing. He was showing her who he was when he was not at Lord Cathcart's table. Rosalind liked him. She told Delphine so on the 2nd week, bluntly, over breakfast, and Delphine said, "That is not sufficient reason to marry someone." And Rosalind said, "No, but it is sufficient reason to stop punishing him," and Delphine had looked at her sister with an expression that might, in a less disciplined face, have been a smile. On the 22nd day, she told him he could propose. She told him in the garden, beside the sundial, on a December afternoon so cold that their breath made small clouds between them. He proposed. She accepted. He kissed her hand, bare, gloveless, because she had known this was the day and had chosen to feel it, and his lips were warm against her cold fingers, and neither of them laughed. They were married in January at the church on River Street, in a ceremony attended by Sir Martin and Rosalind and Mrs. Olton and Grieve, who had ridden from the estate for the purpose, and who stood at the back of the church in his traveling coat and wept quietly into his handkerchief because he had served 3 dukes, and this was the first one he had seen marry for love. The painting appeared in the entrance hall of the Sternford estate the following autumn. It was commissioned from a painter Raphael had sought out himself, a young man with a talent for atmosphere and rain, and it showed a street in Bath, in November, slick with water, gray and shining, with a figure barely visible on the steps of a house whose door was closed. Not open, closed. Raphael had been specific about that. The door must be closed, he had told the painter, That is the whole point. Years later, 3 children later, a son and 2 daughters, all of them possessing their mother's composure and their father's stubbornness in varying and unpredictable combinations, the eldest, a boy named Martin after his grandfather, stood in front of the painting and asked why it was there. "It is a street in Bath," his mother said, standing beside him in the wide entrance hall with its beeswax-scented floorboards and its candlelight reflected in the polished walnut of the stair rail. "But why is it here? It is not a portrait. It is not the estate. It is just rain." Delphine looked at Raphael. He was standing in the doorway of the library, a book in his hand, Cooper, the same volume, the binding soft now with years of rereading. And he met her eyes, and what passed between them was not a word or a gesture, but a recognition, the kind that does not diminish with time but deepens, the way rain deepens the color of stone. "Your father commissioned it," Delphine said. "It reminds him of something." "Of what?" "Of the day he learned the difference between what is easy to say and what is true." Martin considered this with the seriousness of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned to laugh at things he does not understand. "Was it raining that day?" he asked. "Yes," Raphael said from the doorway. "It was raining considerably." He crossed the hall and stood beside his wife, and she took his hand, the gesture so familiar now that neither of them noticed it, and they looked at the painting together, the closed door, the rain, the figure on the steps, and Delphine leaned against his shoulder, and he held her weight as though it were the lightest and most important thing he had ever carried. Outside, beyond the tall windows of the estate, the November garden was bare and beautiful, and the light was the color of old gold. And somewhere in the house, a door was open that had once been closed, and it had stayed open, and it would remain so. They arrive here, like a door held open against the rain, whenever they are ready.